Hello, my old friends. Are you still doing all right these days? The clock on the kitchen wall ticks softly, steady, and indifferent. It's been there for years round. Simple, unremarkable. But lately, I've begun to hear it differently. The sound isn't just time passing anymore. It feels like something counting quietly, faithfully, while no one pays attention. That's how silent damage begins with things we stop noticing. A few months ago, I went for a routine checkup. Nothing dramatic. Just a favor to a younger colleague who insisted I let someone take care of the old doctor for once. I smiled, agreed, and treated it like a formality. My blood pressure was decent. My pulse was calm. I felt fine. That phrase, "I feel fine," is one I've heard all my life. Right before something wasn't fine at all, the blood work came back a few days later. I almost didn't open the envelope. I poured my coffee, glanced at the morning light on the counter, and tore it open out of habit, not urgency. Then I saw the numbers. Cholesterol, higher than I remembered. Fasting glucose, edging toward the line I used to warn others about. Everything else, within range but close. Too close. I stared at those numbers longer than I'd like to admit. They weren't disastrous. They weren't alarming. But they were whispers, the kind that say, "It's starting." The truth is, I hadn't checked them in nearly 3 years. I used to tell my patients to test every 6 months, to watch for changes before symptoms appeared. Yet I, of all people, had stopped listening to my own advice. Why? Because nothing hurt. Because there were no signs. Because silence feels safe, until it isn't. I folded the paper and set it down beside my cup. The clock ticked again, tick, tick, tick. Slow, steady, patient. It reminded me of every moment I'd said to someone, "You're lucky, we caught it early." I'd always meant it kindly, but in truth, there's no luck in it, only awareness. I thought about a man named George, one of my first long-term patients, 68. When I met him, cheerful and active, the kind who looked younger than his years. He came for an ear infection but hadn't had a blood panel in a decade. His cholesterol was sky high, his sugar unstable. "But I feel great," he said, laughing. 3 years later, he had a heart attack mowing his lawn. It wasn't dramatic. No clutching chest, no collapse. He just sat down on the grass and didn't stand up again. That memory came back to me as I looked at my own numbers. How many times had I told people that heart disease doesn't always announce itself? That sometimes the first symptom is the last one. And yet, here I was, a doctor who knew all the words but had stopped listening to their meaning. The silence in the room grew heavier. The clock kept ticking. I realized then how easily health can slip between the cracks of comfort. We trust how we feel more than what we know. We measure our well-being by pain instead of pattern. But the heart doesn't always hurt when it's in trouble. Sometimes it simply tires quietly, building small cracks no one can see. I took another sip of coffee and felt a wave of something I hadn't felt in years. Humility. Not fear, not regret, just a deep, quiet recognition of my own frailty. I used to believe that knowledge protected me. Now I see that awareness is the only real armor. The 1%, those rare few who make it into their 80s and 90s with calm, steady hearts. They aren't lucky. They're deliberate. They keep watch, not out of fear, but out of respect. They understand that prevention isn't about paranoia. It's about partnership with your own body, with time, with life itself. The rest of us wait for alarms. We think, "I'll start exercising when something feels wrong," or "I'll change my diet when my numbers cross the line." But the damage starts long before the noise. It starts with the meals that are mostly fine, the skipped walks, the forgotten tests, the quiet assumptions that tomorrow will always give us another chance. I stood up and walked to the sink, rinsing the cup slowly. My reflection in the window caught me off guard. The man staring back wasn't the confident physician from years ago. He was softer, slower, but perhaps wiser. I could almost hear my patients' voices echoing through time, but, "Doc, I feel fine." And I could hear my own answer, softer now. That's when you need to look the most. It's a strange kind of irony. The healthier you feel, the easier it is to ignore your health. I wiped the counter, folded the report again, and placed it neatly beside the clock. The ticking continued, patient as ever. That sound stayed with me all day. In the garden, at lunch, during my afternoon nap, it followed me, quiet but insistent, as if reminding me that time doesn't wait for awareness to catch up. By evening, I made up my mind. Tomorrow, I'd schedule the follow-up tests, the full panel, cholesterol, triglycerides, A1C, the whole picture. Not because I was afraid, but because I was finally listening. That's the thing about age, it teaches you to read silence differently. What once sounded harmless becomes a signal. What once felt ordinary becomes sacred. The heart, like time, speaks in quiet warnings long before the storm. Only the attentive hear it. The 1% aren't superhuman. They're simply present. They measure, they check, they stay curious. They don't chase youth, they maintain conversation with the years they've been given. That night, before bed, I sat again by the window. The clock ticked softly in the background. I checked my pulse, slow and steady beneath the skin, and whispered the same promise I'd made to thousands of patients this time, to myself. We'll keep an eye on it. Old friend. Just to be sure. The ticking matched my heartbeat, slow, deliberate, alive. Tick, tick, tick. Time still moving. Heart still answering. Tomorrow, I'd make the call. The next morning, the ticking of the clock feels softer, not quieter, but more familiar, like a companion instead of a warning. I sit at the kitchen table again, the same chair, the same cup of coffee, and I think about all the hearts I've listened to in my life, thousands of them, each with its own rhythm, its own story. What still surprises me, even after 50 years, is how many of those hearts broke in silence. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, molecule by molecule, vessel by vessel, until one day, something small gave way. I've seen men collapse in their gardens, women lose consciousness at the grocery store, and families ask the same impossible question, why didn't anyone know? And every time, the answer was the same, because the body doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers for years. I remember a woman named June. She was 74, bright-eyed, lively, full of humor. She came in for routine arthritis pain. Nothing more. Her blood tests hadn't been updated in 6 years. When we finally ran them, her cholesterol and blood sugar were both dangerously high. But I feel fine, she laughed, waving a dismissive hand. If something were wrong, I'd know. She didn't know. 3 months later, she had what's called a silent myocardial infarction, a heart attack that came and went without pain. She only found out afterward, during a scan for something else. The damage had already been done. The heart heals, yes, but scar tissue doesn't forget. I sat with her that day, both of us staring at the same X-ray film, pale white lines cutting across what should have been smooth muscle. She looked at me and said softly, "It's strange, Doc. I never felt a thing." That sentence haunted me for years. I never felt a thing. Because she wasn't wrong. The body can betray without cruelty, without intent. The small vessels in the heart narrow over time. The blood thickens, the walls stiffen, and still no pain, no signal, no alarm. Just the quiet progress of what we can't see. That's why I tell people now the most dangerous diseases are the polite ones. They wait until you're comfortable. They wait until you're convinced everything's fine. They move quietly, hidden behind good moods and busy days. And yet, the opposite is also true. The kindest form of prevention is quiet too. It doesn't demand grand gestures, just small, consistent attention. A blood test, a short checkup, a few numbers on a page. That's all it takes to turn silence into awareness. I used to think those tests were for patients, for them to feel reassured. But now I know they're for peace of mind, not just diagnosis. They're reminders that caring for yourself isn't vanity, it's partnership. I think of another patient, Harold, a retired carpenter. He was meticulous with his tools, checking every saw, every bolt, every blade before use. But when I asked about his health, He shrugged. I only go to the doctor when something breaks. When something breaks, he treated his body like an engine, reliable, replaceable. But the human heart isn't a machine. It doesn't stop in one clean moment. It erodes like wood under rain, quietly softening until one day you press a little too hard and it gives way. I wish I could tell Harold now the maintenance isn't what keeps you alive. It's what keeps you aware. The 1% understand that. They don't wait for symptoms because they've learned to respect the unseen. They know that health is rarely loud. It's a daily act of noticing what doesn't demand your attention. I once asked one of them, an 89-year-old teacher named Samuel, what his secret was. He smiled and said, I read my blood tests the way I read my students' essays. I look for what they're not saying. That's wisdom. Most of us only earn after damage. Now, sitting in my kitchen, I think about all those unseen cracks in arteries, in habits, in time. I think about my own numbers folded neatly beside the clock. I think about how easy it is to delay one simple act that could change everything. I used to think aging meant fighting decline. But perhaps aging means learning to pay attention sooner to the small fluctuations, the gentle warnings, the quiet requests from the body to check in. Every test, every reading, every appointment isn't an interruption. It's a conversation, a way of asking, how are we doing? Old friend. I touch my chest lightly and feel the steady rhythm beneath. It's there, faithful as ever. But I know better now than to mistake steadiness for safety. Because even a clock that ticks perfectly can still be running slow. I think back to June and Harold and Samuel. Their stories still live somewhere inside me, reminders that silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's just the body waiting for you to notice. And so I've started keeping a small notebook beside my bed, nothing complicated. Just dates and notes. When I check my sugar, when I review my cholesterol, how I feel after meals, how often I walk. It's not science. It's attention. The act itself feels grounding, almost meditative. Writing the numbers turns fear into fact, and facts, unlike feelings, can be changed. That's something no one told me when I was younger, that prevention isn't about avoiding death. It's about shaping life. The 1% do that, quietly, faithfully, without applause. They know the heart doesn't need miracles. It just needs consistency. I look again at the clock. Still ticking, still counting, still reminding me that time is both the enemy and the ally. Depending on how you use it, I stand, stretch, and reach for my jacket. There's a small clinic down the street that offers walk-in testing. I've passed it 100 times without stopping. Today, I think I'll stop. Not because I'm worried, but because I finally understand what the ticking means. It isn't a countdown. It's an invitation. The invitation to stay in rhythm, not just with time, but with myself. I pick up my notebook and write a simple line before I leave. Next checkup, Friday morning. Don't forget. Then I close it gently, take one last look at the clock, and whisper, I'm listening. The ticking answers back, tick, tick, tick. Same as always. But this time, it feels like agreement. The clinic was small, almost hidden between a bakery and a florist. I'd passed it countless times before without noticing it. Just another storefront in a quiet neighborhood. That morning, though, I stopped. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the air inside carried the faint scent of antiseptic and coffee. The nurse at the counter looked up, smiled, and handed me a clipboard. Her kindness felt simple, practiced, unhurried, the kind of gentleness that doesn't need words. Filling out the form, I realized how strange it felt to write my own name under patient. For decades, I'd stood on the other side of that desk. I'd been the one telling people to come in before it was too late, to check their numbers, to take nothing for granted. And yet here I was, 85 years old, finally learning to follow my own advice. When the nurse called me in, the world felt unusually quiet. The hum of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic tapping of the keyboard, the faint whir of the centrifuge. Each sound seemed to echo the same message. Life is made of repetition. The same breath, the same pulse, the same small acts of care, again and again. As she drew my blood, I watched the crimson line fill the small tube. It was a humbling sight. 50 years of practice, and I still found it beautiful. The quiet evidence of life moving through fragile vessels, steady and uncomplaining. "Will you call me with the results?" I asked. She smiled. "Of course. Doctor. Probably in a few days." Doctor. It still feels strange hearing the title after all this time. These days, I think of myself less as a physician and more as a witness, someone who's watched what happens when people listen to their bodies and what happens when they don't. As I walked home, the morning light had shifted again. The bakery next door smelled of warm bread. The florist was watering the plants outside. Life carried on in its quiet, predictable rhythm. That's when it hit me. The real miracle isn't in preventing death. It's in noticing life while it's still whispering. We all wait for something loud to wake us up. Pain, fear, crisis. But the 1%, they wake up sooner. They notice the soft warnings, the gentle invitations, the way the heart changes after a heavy meal, the way energy dips after weeks of ignoring rest, the subtle fatigue. That means the blood's not moving as easily as before. They pay attention, not because they're afraid to die, but because they're grateful to live. That afternoon, I sat by the window with my notebook again. The clock was still ticking, faithful, steady. I wrote the date, then a single sentence beneath it. Prevention is an act of gratitude. It felt like a truth I should have learned decades ago. Maybe we all learn it too late. Or maybe late is just another word for finally ready. I thought about June and her silent heart attack. About Harold, who waited for something to break. About Samuel, who read his blood work like poetry. They were all teachers in their own way. They taught me that the heart speaks through patterns, not panit. When I was young, I believed medicine was about fixing what was broken. Now, I believe it's about listening before it breaks. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the sun warm against my hands, and thought of the 1%. I can see their faces, those who live quietly, gently, wisely, the ones who move through each day with awareness. They don't chase youth, they honor time. And I think maybe that's the secret to a strong heart, not strength, but respect. I place my fingers lightly on my wrist. The pulse answers back, steady, steady, steady. The numbers from the test will come in a few days, but they don't scare me anymore. I'm not waiting for good news or bad news. I'm waiting for the truth, and I'll meet it with gratitude. Whatever it is, the clock keeps ticking. The sound blends with the rhythm under my skin until it's hard to tell which is which. Time and heart, beating together. I pour a glass of water, take a slow sip, and breathe deeply. 4 in. Hold for 7. Out for 8. The air feels clean, calm, earned. Outside, the world is soft again. A sparrow lands on the porch railing. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings steady, deliberate, the echo of every heartbeat that came before mine. I smile and whisper, "Still here." The clock answers. Tick, tick, tick. Same sound as before, but this time, it doesn't sound like passing. It sounds like living. The 1% don't wait for symptoms. They stay curious. They test not from fear, but from respect. They understand that silence can hold both danger and wisdom. Health isn't built in emergencies. It's maintained in attention, checking your blood, your sugar, your rhythm. It's not caution. It's gratitude in motion. So tonight, before you rest, take one small action. Schedule your checkup or write a reminder. Because every test is a conversation with your future, and the heart listens to those who listen first.